Hello, everyone. Merry Christmas and advance Happy New Year. I'm so glad to be here. Welcome to Festive Tech Calendar 2022. Myself, I'm Deepthi Goguri. Before beginning, I would like to thank Gregor Sati for giving me this wonderful opportunity to present for Festive Tech Calendar 2022. I'm so excited to be here. Let me share my screen to get started. I hope you are all seeing my screen. So I would like to share my screen. I am not able to see my own face. So let me go ahead and reduce this size. Okay, we'll put it down. So hello everyone. So today I'm going to present on the topic basics of security in Azure. So if you are not familiar with the basics in the security, we are going to cover a lot in this session. So hopefully you like it. So let's get started. So, like I said, myself, I'm Deepthi Goguri. I'm a database administrator, having about like 8 years of experience as a DBA. I'm a Microsoft certified um, trainer and a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. And I did my master's in computer technology at Eastern Illinois University. And I do organize a couple of user groups. I am an organizer for diversity, equity, and inclusion user group, and also Microsoft Data and AI South Florida user group. And also, I'm a volunteer for Women in Technology user group as well. Apart from my work and my community work, I love doing arts and crafts. And if you have any questions regarding this session later, please do not hesitate to contact me either on Twitter or on LinkedIn. I am very active on both of them. So at DBA Nuggets is my user ID for Twitter, and LinkedIn, search by my name, Deepthi Kokuru, you'll find me. And if you would like to go ahead and look at my website, I have a website of my own, dbanuggets.com. I usually blog about SQL Server. So before beginning, let's talk a little bit of analogy regarding the security. So let's take an example of the bank robbery. There is this thief who wanted to rob the bank and take all the money from the bank, let's say. So before entering into the bank, there is this parking lot. So while entering into the main door of the bank, he need to cross through the parking lot, right? The front door. So there we have the security cameras everywhere in place. So that's the outer layer of security that he have to cross. Let's say he crossed that stage, right? That layer of security. And then he broke the main door of the bank. And then there is this main lock on the bank. Let's say he broke somehow, nobody was there, and he was able to break the main door. And main door, we have this huge lock. That's a layer of security, right? Let's say he broke that and he entered into the locker rooms. Each and every locker room has its own key. Let's say it might be digital key or it might be the physical lock. He tried to break and he broke like one or two, but he got very frustrated and he thought like, oh, what do I get from these little boxes? Let me go ahead and directly break the main money vault, let's say. But to go into the main money vault, he have to face this challenge. He have to break the digital lock that is secured even before entering into the main lock. So he tried to enter couple of the key codes that doesn't work. He tried a couple of times, and there is this layer of security in place where like multi-factor authentication, or like if the password doesn't mm, if the password is that has entered is not correct for one or two times, send an alert to the 911, or send an alert to the security guy who will be there for the bank. So he tried multiple times, and then it says password wrong, and it sent the alert to the security guy. And security guy came to know that there's somebody who is trying to unlock the key, and he was unsuccessful. So he immediately called the 911. So that's an additional layer of security. So he have to pass all of these security layers to enter into the main money vault. To enter into the main money vault, there is the physical lock. Even after Even after breaking this digital lock, he have to still break the main lock to enter into the money vault. So there is this all these layers of security that he have to pass through and to take the money from the bank. So it's not easy, right? Because these all these layers of security are set in place. The 911 call automatically it went to the 911 call, and the police are arriving, and this guy is in trouble right now. They will catch him and put him in jail. So in the same way, we have different layers of security in Azure. The top layer is network security, like we talked in our analogy, right? When the thief try to enter into the bank main door, there is this parking lot security cameras. So those security cameras are like the network security. It's like top layer of security. And there are like additional layer of security, in-depth security layers in Azure before entering into the data of your database. Data is more than money here because we have sensitive information. It is valuable more than money. The sensitive like SSN, passwords, whatnot, all of our information is stored everywhere in the databases, right? So we need the in-depth layer of security. So Azure will actually have these in-depth layers: network security, access management, which includes like authentication and authorization, threat protection. If there is some kind of threats, how do we know? How do we get alerts for those threats, right? And then the information protection. Information is our data. So how is our data gets protected in Azure before reaching into the customer data? All of these layers of security should be in place. So we are going to talk about each of these security layers today: network security, identity and access management, data protection, threat protection, and data governance. So let's talk about the main layer of security, which is the network security. So before beginning, like there are like four layers of security, four layers of options in the network security. It goes all the way from the least protected to the most protected. Allow access to Azure services, which is in the left side, is the least protected, and it is least secure because we can only connect within the Azure, but we cannot connect outside of Azure. That means we cannot connect to the on-prem servers, and anything in Azure can connect if you enable this option. But if it is not secure, you might be thinking, why should we even have this option in place, right? So there is a reason, like if you do not want to deal with all the network security, but you quickly want to connect to your database, do some of the operation, test some of the things, and then drop the database for the development purposes, this option is really useful because it will very quickly you will be able to connect to the Azure. Anything, any service in Azure can connect, but you cannot connect to the on-prem servers. And if you do the NS lookup, if you try to see the information of the database, you can still see the public IP address, DNS hierarchy, everything is available, and you can see it like where your database is hosted. All of that information is available, which is not secure, right? So the next layer of security is firewall rules. This is the same way of firewall rules that you create for your on-prem servers while connecting to in and going in and out of the servers. You create those firewall rules, right, to allow and to go out of the connections, to allow the connections from outside. It is the same way you create the firewall rule on each of the service that is trying to connect to your Azure SQL database. Here, you can you can connect to the on-prem servers as well. But then if you do the NS lookup and try to see the information, the NS lookup will show the public IP address. It's still public IP address. It is still connecting through the internet, right? You can see the region where the database is hosted, control ring information, still not secure. Let's go to the another layer of setting, which is a virtual network rule. It is more secure than the firewall rules, but then less secure than the last option, which is a private link option. So here we will create a private virtual private IP address, we'll get it through the virtual network rule. So we will be creating only one virtual network rule on the virtual network where it is connecting to the Azure SQL database. So we can connect to the multiple virtual networks together by using the technologies like VNet to VNet, Express Route. Those technologies will help in connecting the different virtual networks, but we will only create one virtual network rule on the virtual network connecting to the database. So here we will get the private IP address uh, for our database here. So any connection should pass through this virtual network rule. We will just create one virtual network rule here. And if we do the NS lookup, it still shows the region where the database is hosted, control ring information. This information is still shown as public, which is not secure. The last option is the private link, which is the most secure one, because we will get the private IP address for our database by creating uh, the private link. So it is the most secure one. Once we create this private link, uh, private endpoint, meaning like we will get the private IP address for our database, and it will first thing it will do is it will disconnect from the internet. So we will not have any internet connections. Any connection should pass through from this private endpoint to connect to our database. Very secure. Even if you do the NS lookup, you will not able to see in the region information, controlling information, the private IP address. Because we have the private IP address, none of this information will be shown to public. So as we talk about this network security, right? Let's go ahead and see from where we can access this in Azure portal. Go to the security demo, which is my SQL server in my demo. Once I click on that, go to the security blade underneath the networking. As we are talking about the networking, right? The first option, if you see the bottom of the screen, the number one, it shows like allow Azure services and resources to access this server. If I enable that, anything in Azure can connect, right? But then I want to disable that and I wanted to show how we can add the firewall rule. So let's say I have built a database in Azure and I want to connect from my local server. So I need to add my IP address here as a rule, as a firewall rule, so that I can access from my local computer to the Azure SQL database. So I have added here the number two, and then I went ahead and I tried connecting from my local computer using Management Studio to my Azure SQL database, and I could able to connect. If I do not add the firewall rule, I will not have the ability to connect to the database. So we can also add the virtual network rule, but here let's go directly and see how we can create the most um, uh, private private link option, which is like creating the private endpoint. So I disabled all of them. I deleted the firewall rule that I created. If you see, none of them is enabled right now, but I will go ahead and click on the private access underneath the network blade. Very simple to create the private endpoint. It will ask you the name of the private endpoint, on which virtual network you want to create, and then what is your subscription ID, all of that. I'm not going to show you in detail like how to do it because it is very simple to create. Once I create the private endpoint, I would like to check if by querying if it is really showing the private IP address. So I connected to the virtual machine that I created on the virtual network where I have created the private endpoint. So I connected from there to the Azure SQL database and um, I tried getting the client net address um, for my connection, And I have seen this IP address 10.0.0.7, which is private IP address. Now, how do I know and make sure it is private IP address? I would like to go to the Azure portal again, and I would like to connect to the virtual machine where I have logged in to connect to the Azure SQL database. And the connection here highlighted, it shows the private IP address, which is 10.0.0.7. That is a private address, not the public IP address. So it is very secure. Now let's go ahead and talk about the identity and access management. So identity and access management is all about the authentication and authorization. What is authentication? It's like proving who you are and proving you are the authenticated person, connecting, trying to connect to the Azure portal, Azure SQL database. Like when you try to connect to the Azure portal, you get that multi-factor authentication, the code that you receive on your phone or through the authentication app where you need to access and click on it so that it will give the authentication. It will prove that it's you, the authorized person who wanted to connect to the Azure SQL database. So it's a multi-factor authentication that you have to follow to enter into the Azure resources. That's like proving the user. That's authentication. So authentication is available for both Azure SQL database and managed instance supports. So both the SQL authentication and Azure Active Directory authentication is available in both Azure SQL and managed instances. You can also only choose Azure Active Directory authentication only. But let's say you build a logical server while building your Azure SQL database. While building the logical server, you need to provide the SQL authentication ID and password while building that logical server. So that ID and password will automatically become the server level principal. And if you are trying to build a managed instance, right, the ID and password that you provide while building the managed instance, that account, that ID and password will become the sysadmin server role automatically. Now that's authentication. Let's talk about the authorization. It's like the access to your resources itself, like to your database, tables, columns, and data, right? It's like giving the authentication and controlling the access to the resources. So there are like database roles, custom roles available in um, Azure SQL as well as a managed instance. We can also provide the role level security to make sure we are following the least privilege. We are using these principles only for the least privilege. To give the least privileges, we can also give the role level security. So to see where we can see the logical, like the ID and password, which will become the server admin for the logical server. DG test server is my logical server for my demo. So once I go there, if I see the server admin, Deepthi is the ID and I have provided the password. So that will automatically become the server admin of my logical server. There are these default role-based access control, which are a couple of like what what can and cannot be done to the resources. There are like default role-based access control. One is the owner. They like if we give a person the owner privileges, they can do everything. They can read, modify, as well as assign other users as the owners. But the contributor, they can read and modify, but they cannot add other people and assign them the permissions. Reader can only read the resources, like the name conveys, right? The reader. But these permissions are can be given in the hierarchies, all the way starting from the subscription, resource group, resources, they can be inherited. So where do we see these role-based access control, right? Go to the logical server that we have built, DG test server in my case. And left side your left side pane, go to the access control, which is IAM. And then once you click on IAM, go and click on add role assignment, and there it will clearly shows the default roles over there. So to see these roles, we have to try to add a user. That's how we will see these roles: the owner, contributor, and the reader. There are like several other built-in roles as well, but these three are the main ones that I would like to show today, which are in the general category. Now let's talk about the authorization, which contains the logins, users, and what are the differences between the managed instance and Azure SQL database when comes with the authorization. So let's talk about the managed instance. While building the managed instance, we can create the ID and the password, which will become the Azure Active Directory server admin, like we discussed before, right? You can create the logins by using SQL logins or Azure Active Directory logins. But when you are giving permissions to the users, right, you can build the database users just like the way you create in on-prem servers, like you have the use login and associated users in the databases, right? And you'll provide the permissions to those users onto your tables and the resources within the database. But you can also create the contained users. So what are these contained users? Contained users just have the user ID and password, but they do not have to have the login at the server level. They can directly provide the ID and password and directly connect to the database and resources where you have given the permissions to. They do not have to have the login. And when we compare these logins and users to the Azure SQL database, there are little differences when we see the Azure SQL database. In the Azure SQL database, you can create the Azure Active Directory server admin. You can create the SQL logins as well. But there are like additional roles that are available in Azure SQL database, like for example, the login manager, DB manager. These are the additional roles that we have just to limit the users by not providing them the server admins, but then we can give them like certain additional roles without us giving them the server admin um, access. We still have the database users over here. We can still create the contained users without having the login. We can use the Active Directory authentication only to give these contained users, to create these contained users. But then the main thing that we have to remember here is to create the logins, to create the users, the, the login ID that needs to be connected to create these users have to be the Azure Active Directory server admin only. You cannot connect as a SQL login and then create these users. You have to log in as a Azure Active Directory server admin. Now let's talk about the data protection. We have several flavors of the data protection. Encryption in transit, meaning the data needs to be protected while coming in and out of the database, while connecting to the application, and while the data is transferring from the application to the database, the data needs to be protected while moving, right? And that will happen by using the transparent layer security. And by default, you are enforced to select the transparent layer security. It is enabled by default. The other flavor is encryption at rest, meaning you need to encrypt the data on the drives. The data files, the log files, the backup files needs to be protected. And while you are pulling the data from the drives, from these log and the data files, the data needs to be protected while pulling and while placing on the drives on these files back. The data needs to be protected, and even this is by default enabled, but it is being done by the transparent data encryption. It is all about encryption at rest. And the other one is encryption in use. So that means like the data needs to be protected while it is being processed. While your queries are being processed, the data needs to be protected while coming outside or while the data is being processed and while it is being sent from the database to the application. And there are certain um, technologies like the data enclaves, which is used to make sure the data is encrypted while it is still being processed. So let's talk a little bit about the encryption in transit. Like I said, it is enabled by default, and we are enforced to select the transparent layer security while creating the database. And it is enforced all the time for all the connection, but you have to make sure from your application side that the transparent layer security version that you are selecting is still accepted and it is still compatible with your application. And you need to make sure from your application the encrypted connection from the application is always turned on. Otherwise, you cannot connect to your database. So where do we see this in Azure portal, right? Once you connected to the logical server, here DG test server in my case, I'm going to the networking blade underneath the security. And until now, we have seen the network security, public access, private access, but this time, let's click on the connectivity and click on the encryption in transit. Like I said, you are enforced to select this minimum TLS version. So please make sure you are always on the latest TLS version because some of the TLS versions, like for example, TLS 1.0 is the old version. They are deprecated. So you need to make sure you are always on the latest version and that latest version is still compatible with your application. Next, encryption at rest, meaning your data files, log files, backup files needs to be protected. While pulling the data from the data files, it still have to be protected at the drive location. If somebody tries to hack your system and try to access your data files and log files, backup files, these files needs to be protected. Even if they pull the data, they cannot access any of the information. That's called encryption at rest. So it is being done by the transparent data encryption, and even this encryption at rest is enabled by default, and you can manage your own keys. These are done by managing the keys in the key vault. Key vault is the application available from the Azure, from the Microsoft. So you can allow Microsoft to take care of these keys for you, which is by default, they will be taking care of. But if you want to build your own key, you have to build your own key, manage your own key, giving the permissions to the other people. If you wanted to do that, you can also have the ability to um, bring your own key and store these keys in the key vault. Now we are going to see how to do that today. Once you are connected to the SQL server, here I have a SQL server built security demo to show you the transparent data encryption. Underneath the security blade, go to the transparent data encryption. The first option you see is transparent data encryption, service managed key, customer managed key. Microsoft by default is always placed on the service managed key, which is taken care by Microsoft. You do not have to worry about like creating the keys, managing those keys. You don't have to worry about that. Like, and then renewing the keys, Microsoft is going to take care of that. But if you're choosing customer managed key, you are responsible to create the key, saving the keys in the key vault, and then rotating the keys as they expire. It's up to you. So service managed key is taken care by Microsoft. So we are not going to see much on that today, but let's go ahead and talk how to build your own key. So I'm going to select on the customer managed key. And then to do that, we need to first create the key, right? So I'm going ahead and putting the radio button on select a key, the next option. But then we do not have a key right now to select a key. We have to first build a key, right? So to build the key, we need to first create the key vault, because that's where we will put and place and save our keys. Building the key vault is very simple. It is not much expensive. You can build as many key vaults as you want. Like you have, if you have like different clients, you can build the key vault for each of those clients separately, so that you are dividing and managing them nicely. So let's say we are building the key vault. So to get into the key vault, go search for the key vault on the search bar. You can create the key vault very simply. I'm not going in depth of how to create that, but you need to just provide the subscription details and like what is your key vault name and stuff. Once you click on the key vault, once you build the key vault, go ahead and click on the objects. Underneath the objects, go ahead and click on keys. And here I have already created two of the keys, security demo 1, security demo 2. So let's go ahead and click on one of them to see how we can actually create them. I have clicked on security demo 1, and if you see here, it will show you the current version, which is like a coded value, like a code. Be like it, like that version is shown, where you can go ahead and just click a couple of buttons where you can create that, and it will show you like enabled or the activation date and the expiration date. So I would like to go ahead and click on that one to show in detail what details will should we be providing while creating this. So the properties, underneath the properties, if you see the key type, key size, those are the details that are internally managed by Microsoft. You do not have to worry about that, but you need to make sure you're creating, when are you creating, and uh, what is the validation date, like set the activation date and set the expiration date. And you can also provide like permissions. From here itself, you can provide the permissions to the other users of what they can do, whether they can access this key and whether they have the ability to rotate the key, those kind of permissions. Here, I have given the user, Deepthi Goguri, the permissions. I have given select permissions, the secret permissions to view the key, to get unwrapped key and wrapped key. I have given the permissions. Underneath the access policies, you can see the permissions. So once I created the key, right, I would like to come back to the transparent data encryption again, and then make sure I'm clicking on the customer managed key here, click on the select the key, and then click on the change key, and then choose the key. The key store type is the key vault, and then underneath the key vault, you are choosing the key vault name, and underneath the key, go ahead and click on which key you want to select, and the version is automatically populated as you select the key. And if you are building your own key and once your keys are expired, you have to come here and change the version of the key. If you see the last option, the version, you are responsible to click on that and change the key version. Click on select once you select the key, and then click on save to activate your customer managed key. That is a transparent data encryption to encrypt the data at rest. Now let's go ahead and talk about the encryption in use, where once you execute the queries, while your queries are being processed, you need to make sure that processing data should be protected as well. So there is this client-side encryption technology that we have, which is known as the data enclave. It is always encrypted with secure enclaves. So There is this SQL client driver in between your SQL database, the database engine, as well as the data client to make sure that while your queries are being processed, the data is secured, the data is encrypted. So the database engine will delegate the operations on the encrypted data to the enclave where the data can be safely decrypted and processed. So these kind of secure enclaves are really useful while you are doing the range of the queries. Like for example, you are using multiple operations like the range operations, like the pattern matching, greater than, less than, sorting operations, indexing, and more. If you are using these kind of operations in your queries, using like always encrypted with secure enclaves is beneficial. And let's talk about the dynamic data masking, which is masking of the data itself, but it is not encryption. It is not encryption at rest. Your data files, log files, we are not talking about that data encryption at rest. We are talking about the data masking itself, like masking of your columns within your tables. It is similar way like you create the data masking on-prem on your columns. It is similar way we create the mask on the columns in Azure as well, in Azure SQL database. To create the data masking, go to the Azure SQL database that you created. Here, AdventureWorks is my database. So what I did was like click on the database, go to the security blade, click on dynamic data masking, and add the mask. So while you are adding the mask, you need to provide certain details like the schema, table name, column name, and it will give you the mask function by default. You can choose the default value and then click on save. And to provide the permissions, to unmask permissions to your users, just like the way you use the T-SQL, you can use the same query to unmask and mask the permissions to the users. Let's talk a little bit of threat protection and detection. We have Azure Defender, SQL auditing, and Azure Security Center to look at the data um, of what all data is collected while protecting your data, right? So the first one is Azure Defender. It have two flavors in it, SQL vulnerability assessment and SQL threat detection. So once you enable the Azure Defender, SQL vulnerability assessment is all about assessing your configuration of your database according to the standards of the Azure. So basically, Azure have certain standards of how to build your Azure SQL database. So if those configuration settings are not following those standards of Azure, you will see the alerts in the SQL vulnerability assessment. You can go ahead and act on it, or you can just ignore it. It's all based upon what are your policies within your environment. The next option is Azure Defender again, but this time it's the threat detection. Like it's a 24 by 7 watchman looking at who is entering into the house and exiting the house, who is trying to access your resources. And if somebody else is trying to access, you will get the threat alerts. If you set up the alerts to send an email to you, you'll get those alerts. And the third one is SQL auditing. It's like general auditing that you do in the on-prem. It's the same kind of auditing that you can do at the logical level of the server or to your database. And Azure Security Center is like a centralized location where you can see all of this information. Let's talk about the Azure Defender. Like once you go to the logical server, DG test server, underneath the auditing, underneath the security blade, go to the auditing and click on Microsoft Defender for SQL, turn it on. Once you turn it on, you need to provide where you want to store this information, right? So you want to store in the storage account, let's say Select the storage account or create one if you do not have it here. And you can also send the scan reports to your email. Provide the email address which you want to send those emails to. And then once you click OK, now we want to go ahead and see how the information is actually stored and how you can see those assessment details, right? Go to the DG's test server, which is a logical server. Underneath the logical server, go to the security blade and click on Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Give a couple of minutes once you enable it because it needs to analyze the data according to the standards of Azure and it have to provide the recommendations. So I have waited a couple of minutes to an hour to see these recommendations. So I see 6 recommendations and 4 findings. I would like to see in details what are these recommendations. I have seen the severity, high, low, medium severity, and the description. But if you'd like to know more details into these recommendations, click on View Additional Recommendations in Defender for Cloud, which will take you to the recommendation page, which will show you the detailed descriptions, right? These are the recommendations for the vulnerability assessments. You can see the insights, and if there are like only couple of resources that needs to be looked into, it will show you there like unhealthy resources, how many resources are being affected, and it will show the insights in green as well as red. Red is like purely unhealthy, green shows like they are healthy. If you would like to go into more details, you can go ahead and click there. But this is at the logical level of the server, logical server. But you can also see the same kind of details underneath the database. And underneath the Azure SQL database, if you go to the Microsoft Defender for Cloud, you are going to see the findings over here as well. Now I would like to see the recommendations. So I'll click on View All Recommendations in Defender for Cloud. Once I click on that, I have seen the vulnerability assessment findings. So this is related to the database, like how my database is currently being configured, right? So I see the ID like VA1258 and security check details. It says like database owners are as expected, but it is showing the severity level as high. So I would like to go ahead and click on that to see the recommendations. Once I clicked on that, the first one, it shows me like remove unnecessary database owners. You do not need those many database owners. And it will provide you the remediation script if you want to execute. Or do you want to put this as a baseline? Or if you want to remove this as a baseline, it's all depending upon your environment. You can either add, you can either remove them from the baseline. It's up to you. But it will show you all the details of these vulnerability assessment for your database. Now let's go ahead and talk about the auditing. Underneath your logical server, right? DG test server in my case, I'll go to the security, go to the auditing. And once I click on auditing, I see the Azure SQL auditing. It is not enabled by default. You need to enable it. So once you enable it at the logical server level, the databases underneath that will automatically enable the auditing on it. So once you do that, you need to go ahead and click on place where you want to save these auditing information. I would like to go ahead and create a workspace, the default workspace. I would like to go ahead and click on the subscription details. And I would like to choose log analytics where I wanted to save these details. So it has automatically saved in default workspace. And I would like to also enable, if you see the last option, enable auditing for Microsoft support operations. So once I click on that, Microsoft will have the ability to go ahead and look into your audit reports whenever you create any ticket to them, like fixing any problem with them, like getting them in having the support to solve any problem. If you would like to have them access your auditing details while working on any tickets with you, enable this option. And to view the audit logs, again, go to your database at the database level. If you would like to see, go to the auditing underneath the security blade and click on view audit logs. That will open up the audit records. But if you'd like to see in a dashboard, click on view dashboard, where you can see the data governance information, which is the circle, which we are going to talk about in the next slides. But then here we wanted to see the auditing records that has gathered underneath the security insights. Go ahead and click on that, where you can create the audit, where you can see the auditing details. Like if you see here underneath the audit distribution, you see the batch completed data authentication, RPC complete. These are the regular default auditing records that have been gathered. Once you click on that, you can go ahead and look into the details. You can view the in the editor, in the query editor, you can see all of those details, like who have accessed what, and what is the instance name, database name, object name, what query has run, which user has executed. All of that information, like general auditing information, is available. Now let's go ahead and talk about the data governance, which comes under the data classification. This is all about like classifying your data, your column data, your database data, depending upon whether it is sensitive or not. So underneath the database, go to the auditing again, go to the security blade, go to the data discovery and classification. So here we are classifying the data of your database, the column data, based upon the sensitivity level. Let's say you have a column named SSN, you have all the SSN details in it, and you want to make sure none of them are accessing that particular information because it is sensitive, right? And for example, if somebody tried to access that column information, you need to get an alert. So that's when the data classification and data discovery come in place. So let's say we want to go ahead and build the data classification on a couple of columns. So it is very simple to create. All it requires is it will ask you to provide the schema name, table name, which column you want to create, and what kind of sensitivity label you want to give, like high sensitivity, non-sensitive data. So here I would like to create the sensitivity label on 3 of the columns: product ID, sales order ID, and unit price, let's say. And you can also provide the information type, financial, or what kind of information type it is. And then once you wanted to look like who has accessed what, go to your Azure SQL database again, go to the auditing. You can view this information and who have access to your sensitive information, the data classification information, the column information within the auditing records itself. So go to the auditing, go to the audit reports. You can see this information, like how many number of queries has run and what all queries have actually executed. The green color circle will show like number of queries that have run, and if you want to know in detail what queries it is, click on that, and it will open up the query editor again, where you can go ahead and edit that query editor. You can go ahead and choose like what all queries has executed, and you can look into the detail. Because you are viewing it in the auditing records, it will provide all of the information: who has access to what is a computer name, what is a username, all of that information. And I believe I have covered everything, like all the in-depth security layers of Azure. But if you'd like to know more about each of these components, right, go ahead and watch these resources from Microsoft. Um, Anna Hoffman has interviewed the product teams, Microsoft product teams, especially on the Azure security. And they have talked about each of the layer of security in depth. Like each of the video is around like 1 hour to 1.5 hours. It will give you a lot of information, and I have followed all of that information to prepare my presentation. So I hope you liked my presentation today, and I would like to thank you for taking your time for visiting this session to view this session and learn something new today. And I would like to thank Gregor Sati for giving me this wonderful opportunity. I would like to thank the Festive Tech Calendar entire team, the organizing team, for putting this together so that everybody can learn something during the festival season. I thank you one and all one more time and Merry Christmas. If you'd like to contact me at DBA Nuggets is my user ID. Again, it would be an honor to get in touch with you. Thank you so much.